Good afternoon. My pleasure to welcome you to the first of this afternoon's week of VocTech events. This panel discussing cracking the code, selling innovation and driving adoption in workforce development. My name's Louise Marston. I'm Director of Ventures at the Resolution Foundation. We are a partner with the UFI VocTech Trust and co-investors with the UFI Ventures team. And I'm really pleased to be chairing this panel talking about the challenges and opportunities of selling learning solutions and workforce development into companies. And we have an excellent panel to discuss that. So I don't think you need to tell you that the world of skills and work is changing very rapidly. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced that. There's a lot of new technology to use and to adopt, as well as changing economic demands and customer expectations, and lots of different worker preferences to accommodate alongside that. So it's a really complicated landscape. We have a really great panel to discuss some of the challenges and opportunities of selling into that sort of landscape today. So I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, and then we're going to open to discussion. So Alex, would you like to start?
Yep. Hi everyone. I'm Alex Nosis, Global Head of Digital Learning at Ocado. My background actually is from the other side, actually building edtech products and software and delivering to clients like Ocado, and I moved into Ocado 3 years ago, so I can see it from both sides. Can't hear me? Is that loud enough? Go again? A bit louder? Better? 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 Cool. Would you like to start again? Yes, no worries. Thank you. Alex Nosis, Global Head of Digital Learning at Ocado. My background actually was more building and selling edtech products into enterprise companies, and I moved into the other side, the dark side, into the corporate world 3 years ago at Ocado. So I've got a really good lens on, what worked from my side, and also now seeing that being sold to me internally from a buyer perspective. So yeah, that's me.
Helen.
Thanks, Louise. Is that working? Yep, brilliant. Helen Gironi, I'm Director of Ventures at UFI. We have a couple of investment funds that back early stage ventures in the skill space. So essentially, businesses that have technology that helps adults learn vocational skills that help them find work, progress in that work, both for their benefit and the benefit of the companies. So my experience in this area really stems from having followed the 19 actually now portfolio companies that we've backed, and seeing their experience, the challenges they faced, how they flexed and made it work for them. Thanks.
Hello, Greg Freeman, CEO and founder of Data Literacy Academy. We are a horizontal in audience business where our audience is entirely enterprise, vertically aligned to the data industry, which it probably won't shock you that much. We were founded at the end of 2022, so about 2.5 years ago. UFI invested on day one and then again at the start of 2023. We've booked about £9 million in revenue since then. We're a very sales-focused edtech company is how I would describe us. And we make a lot of our revenue from growth accounts into major organisations like the Ministry of Defence, BAE Systems, Dunelm, Visa, those types of businesses. So that's what we do.
Thanks, Greg. So we're going to get into what it looks like, both from somebody trying to create learning solutions and sell into companies, what it looks like from the company side, what it looks like from the investor side, as we try and navigate this landscape. So we're going to start by thinking about buyer personas. So who are these buyers? What do they want? And how can you satisfy them? Alex, describe a bit about what you're looking for from a buyer, as a buyer in this market, and also maybe your experience of selling into that market when you were building things as a founder as well.
Yeah. So I think from the selling in perspective, what I've seen is it's very varied. You've got people that are very data-driven focused, insight-focused. What am I going to get? And I'm a bit like that from a buyer perspective as well. Is I'm always going to ask about the data. What insights can I get off the back of this? You've got sort of tech-savvy personas that are more sort of like senior peers in the organisation that have a real big impact on decisions that are made. Actually, and I see that at Ocado as well, where actually we've got very talented tech people across the organisation that have big influence, and actually without them engaged, decisions aren't really even thought about. Cross-functional influences as well, I think that's really important, and that's kind of a bit like my role, where I have to go across all of our functions in our business and actually engage to make sure that's actually a decision can be made, because it's not a L&D decision or a HR decision or a tech decision. And there's actually an ESG layer as well now. Sustainability is becoming such a big part of everything that we do, and we're challenged on that in any decision we make now. So those are a few examples of the type of personas that I see and how we engage with them.
Yeah. So what does the buyer look like from your perspective, Greg, and how do you find the magical unicorn that has all of these qualities and can do all these things inside the business?
I said before, they're annoying, right? No, I mean, for us, the buyer is not a learning and development buyer, so none of our budget comes from L&D or HR, which is, I believe, semi-unique for learning solutions. But the buying group for us starts with the strategic subject matter experts who will benefit from the software, so and learning experience, which is either the chief data officer or the chief information officer, tends to kind of expand by design in our world to L&D, who then become as a support function. Obviously, a lot of today's talk is around how do you embed and make it successful and grow, and we found that bringing in the project management office, the change management office, the internal comms office is all part of creating a buying group that supports the delivery of an effective deployment. And I think that willingness to go wider is really, really important, but having it championed from a budget perspective by the people who will see the end value of what we do is the thing that we really go after.
Helen, I wonder from the point of view of your portfolio, what sort of strategies do people take to approaching this, figuring out who their buyer is and finding the right people once they've got that persona identified?
It's a really interesting question, and it's something that the companies I've worked with do grapple with. I think where I've seen it done particularly well is where people have gone to organisations that are already selling into their target clients and asked them how it works in that organisation, how it works in that sector. I think also where I've seen it work well is companies that can pivot. So, if one conversation in an organisation is not working, one route in is not working, trying another, and just having the tenacity to try lots of different routes in, being really focused on who should be in the room in order for a decision to be made. So for those key meetings where you're selling, making sure that all the key buyers are there. Those are the sort of key learnings I've noticed.
Yeah. So thinking about the sort of environment that we're in at the moment, Alex, I wanted to ask about how you see the kind of landscape going forward in terms of we've got some economic challenges in the current economy, certainly in the UK. We've got sort of employment broadly flat at the moment, but we've got some big changes happening in April. We've got the NICs increases and minimum wage increases, which were potentially affecting people's sort of decisions around employment and how much they want to invest in talent and learning. What does that landscape look like from your perspective, and how do you think about as you're a data-driven buyer, what are sort of the metrics that will kind of help you to make progress in that environment?
I think I've gone through that in the last year as well. So we've had to make some hard decisions and use data to make informed decisions around that. It's really tricky because we've had to adapt our solution but be more agile around that. So I think when I first came into the business, it was quite rigid. We weren't looking at this like globally, like how what that impact looked like. Our solutions weren't fit for purpose. It was very traditional from an L&D perspective, and it's actually like kind of almost like ripping up that playbook and going, actually, what's the approach that's going to impact from a commercial layer, but how do I engage our business from a budget perspective as well? Because I own a budget, but actually there's a bigger, wider learning budget across the organisation where people want to invest in, and it's how do I start to pull the strings to get everyone aligned from a strategic perspective. Actually, it's more cost efficient because I was seeing overspend and spend in the same places around things that weren't having the impact. So it's really challenging that kind of status quo of like, this is not how we do this anymore. You know, I'd happily take £500,000 out of my budget if I can then collectively we create a better solution.
Yeah.
So it's getting people to think differently around that.
Yeah.
They're not. It's very kind of product mindset and agile and adapting to that need. And at Ocado, we're very fluid and agile, and there's always something new happening every 3 months we've got to adapt to. So having that right infrastructure to support that is really important.
Yeah. So Greg, you already talked about not necessarily selling in through sort of traditional L&D channels. What are some of the sort of strategic priorities that you're seeing in terms of your buyers in CIO or CDO roles, and how are you kind of helping them think about the challenges they're facing? Obviously, you've got a product which is dealing with skills that are in very high demand, but still they've got challenges on their side as well, I imagine.
Yeah, I think from my view of the way forward for the industry is I think we'll probably move away from money being spent on learning for learning's sake, and I think there are some platforms that are deeply embedded into major organisations that are learning for learning's sake, and they're not learning with direction, they're not learning with strategic alignment. And I think because budgets are getting tighter, all the macroeconomic problems that we face, whether it's in this country or more widely. So I think that's the first thing, is that you need to get very clear on the problem the business problem you solve and the business outcome you can expect to receive by spending money on your solution. I mean, we do very early on in the process try and take it much, much higher in terms of corporate strategy than even the data strategy. If people start talking to us about things that are important to their data strategy, we kind of ask them to pause and say, that's not necessarily the strategy we care about at this point. Like, what does the CEO care about? And we've had some really good examples recently where CEOs have been able to say to us, oh, well, my remit from data is to make buying more efficient or supply chain more efficient. It's that data literacy can help you with, but most learning interventions of all types can have a strategic alignment if you as a business are able to bring it to that level. And I think going into meetings, it's almost unacceptable, depending on how you look at it, to go into a meeting with a prospect, especially a senior prospect, and have not reviewed their corporate strategy, have not reviewed publicly available information on the organisation. And we all know that GPTs are there now, they're part of our world every day. Even live in the meeting, if you're struggling to get them to talk about the things that actually matter to their business, just asking ChatGPT in real time, what does X business care about in 2025? Solves a massive problem for you, right? Like, you can't talk about your own strategy? Well, I'll talk about your strategy for you. And is this what the business cares about? Oh, yeah, it is. Like, you've got to do yourself that justice of being prepared with what they care about, and that'll help you to take them to the level of strategic value that you actually need to be able to charge them tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds for the solution, rather than just being a kind of L&D tick box solution, I guess. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a really obvious approach when you describe it that way, to get to the senior levels and to kind of have that discussion about what's the broader strategy and how does this fit in. But how did you come up with this? How did you kind of figure out that approach? Was it obvious for you from the beginning, or did you figure that out in the course of developing the business?
My background is commercial. It's I've been in go-to-market since I started my career, and I think the view I've had is that the more strategic I've become, the more value people see in what we do. And Ant and I spend a lot of our time quite annoyed by the fact that people don't talk at a strategic level and that kind of thing. So just being able to do that, but being brave enough to do it, right? Like, it's a difficult conversation to have if beyond saying to somebody, your strategy says this, and they say, oh, you're right, it does. Now let's talk about supply chain optimization in 5 regions. And you go, oh yeah, no, cool. Like, that isn't an option. You've got to kind of raise it yourself. But yeah, I think it's a no-brainer to me now to propose conversations that take place at that level, not at that level.
Yeah. Thinking about this a bit more tactically, Alex, I'd love to talk a bit about how you could influence this question of which budgets. You were talking about sort of taking a bit of budget from one area and combining it with yours and kind of being able to pay for something that's more strategically aligned that helps solve more problems. How do you in practice go about sort of arranging those things and using your kind of entrepreneurial skills to kind of figure out what that looks like?
Definitely a challenge. I think when I first joined the business, it was very siloed. Everyone was investing, like I said, in their own solutions, not thinking about the bigger picture strategically. And I made a kind of a big pivot with using my budget to actually build a better infrastructure to allow the learning products to succeed. So it was more about what does the overarching people experience look like as a whole solution at Ocado? Then what does that tech stack look like? And how do we bring it together, engaging with IT as well from a business app perspective? Because if you can't engage people through the right tools and services, then your learning products or edtech products got no hope of surviving or getting that engagement that you might need. And building that overarching solution to then be in a position to go, okay, well, are these learning products actually working? And can I move things around? So that was like my my budget approach, but actually the second layer was more about, okay, I can see there's this huge learning budget that exists at Ocado from a learning perspective. We do heavily invest at headcount level, which I think is great, but it's either not being utilised. So it's just money that just gets banked every year. A bit like a levy. It felt like a levy pot, really. It was just like, why are we not using this? Or certain pockets of organisation were spending all of it. So whoever shouted the loudest got the money, and then you've got this kind of unequitable piece in the business. So what we did was, okay, why don't we pull that budget, get a product that can allow us to build a marketplace for everyone to learn in one consistent way. We spent nothing on that. It was very much, even the licenses are paid by the streams in our organisation, which was a hot topic at first, to try to sell that to leadership. And then everyone could access exactly the same thing, any modality of learning, spend their budget. The insights we got was amazing, and then suddenly there was no noise from leadership. They're like, this makes total sense, and actually we've got a consistent approach for how we deliver. But that took a lot of time to engage, work around the SLTs, really kind of explain the logic. It's a big change. A lot of organisations like, this doesn't feel right. Like we're putting money in the hands of the individual, empowering them to make a decision rather than we want to control what this is and we're going to tell you what you're going to learn, which I'm completely against. So that step change really helped. We're seeing the fruits of that labour now.
Yeah. No, taking a kind of higher perspective on it as well. Helen, thinking ahead, looking at kind of budgets for this year and for the outlook beyond that, when you're thinking of this as an investor, what are you looking at in terms of sort of trends and headwinds that the people are experiencing in terms of the selling into these budgets? What is the kind of successful strategy you want to see the companies taking to try and kind of make the most of the budget that's out there?
Really good question. Thank you. I think personal learning budgets at the moment are quite squeezed and quite difficult to sell into. So really a focus on how you are going to save a business money, how you're going to make work for them more efficient is really the key here. I do think that's cyclical. I think personal learning budgets will increase in the future, but that's just the part of the cycle that we're in at the moment, that they are a bit squeezed. I think those are the sort of major sort of headwinds we see. Also, the national insurance increase that's just coming is going to have an effect. So I think we'll see companies behaving more strategically in terms of the learning that happens within an organisation. Again, focus on saving money rather than a spend per employee, and also less focus on learning possibly that retains that employee, but makes the business more robust and more efficient.
Yeah. So thinking about sort of what's persuasive for buyers, I want to think about what data you can be gathering. What are the metrics that you use in your sales process, Greg, and what do you find kind of really helps convince people on the value of this stuff? What's the most important numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we take a slightly different lens on this, and I said to Alex on a sales call that I set him up with today, we just don't really care about learning metrics. Like, I want people to turn up to our learning, of course I do. I want people to enjoy it. I want them to think their educator's a smart person. That is semi-important. What is actually important, though, is can we show transferability into their job role? So do they adopt data products, the tools they're served as a result of their job role through the learning? Or if they've got a low baseline right now, can we pick that up? If X% of decisions are made with data today, then what does the future look like in 12 months' time with the percentage of decisions that are made by data? Ant spends a lot of his time building quite detailed ROI cases of using lots and lots of research that's out there from McKinsey and PwC and EY and all those big research houses to say that actually if you implement data literacy in this function, it will save you 3% on time optimization. So an average salary of X, what does that mean for Y? So learning metrics matter, and L&D teams definitely want to see them, and we provide all of those as table stakes. But actually, the conversations that we use as we're building the business case and we're building the ROI case are much more aligned to the behavioural change, the mindset shift, and the ROI of that than they are anything to do with learning metrics.
Yeah. And as someone who's also invests and encourages people to measure their impact and measure what they're doing, the learning metrics are the easier thing to measure, though.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
It's a lot easier to gather that data
100%.
than it is to get the agreement to follow those learners down the line and see what happens to their
100%.
behaviour change. So how do you set that up? What are the things you do to put in place the measures that actually do matter, and then be able to play that back?
Yeah, so we've like defined a framework which is underpinned by the concept of, during the pre-sale, we will do what is called a value hunting process, where we speak to key stakeholders, key SMEs about opportunities in their department. I think a higher level framing of this is that we don't really do what we would describe as an appetite cohort. So we don't just teach people who put their hand up to say they want to learn, which obviously counts as the kind of point you made. But I think in our world, by making it aligned to a strategic program of change or a particular department that might be going through a transformation at a given time, we've found far more measurable impact beyond the learning metrics, and that has been a key differentiator of the way we've done things. We spend a lot of time in the pre-sale consulting the client through who the learners should be and why and what their strategic value will be. And that then allows you to take the kind of strategic perceived value at the start from the value hunting, put a forecast on it, which is a value forecast, which is what Ant spends a lot of his time doing. And then we have program success managers who carry the program the entire way through, and you can't really have enterprise clients without a program success manager anyway, so you need to have those people in place. And their job becomes tracking value realization. And in fact, I think this is so important in our world and the value that we sell our programs at. We're about to hire one or more people whose entire job will be tracking value realization with clients. So they will embed within a client mid-program at some point, speak to the learners, observe their day job, all those types of things, because we don't have recurring revenue in the sense that and this was obviously something we talked about really early, Helen. What we have is what we would describe as repeatable revenue, which is if we do a good job, we will expand elsewhere in the program and that will go bigger. But it's not a CRM where they're definitely going to keep us every time. So the ability to realize value and prove value is just so much bigger when you've not got a deeply embedded technology, that we have to invest in that space, and it's where we spend most of our thinking time, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with a question there? I'm just wondering how universally accepting and embracing of that your clients are. I mean, it works for them, presumably, but they do.
They
all
absolutely
of them,
love it. Like, it's been the biggest eye-opener. They've been, from all we can tell, they've been waiting for a learning partner to have a conversation with them that actually talks about true impact and ROI rather than just learning metrics. And our biggest clients, I mentioned some of them earlier, probably see 2,000 learning partners in a calendar year, would be my guess. They must have the whole spectrum. And they've just been unbelievably complimentary about the amount of time we spend on measurement and ROI and that type of thing. And I think it's why they feel they can go to the top table and say, this has had impact because, and they're never going to do it themselves, so we have to invest money to help them do it, I think.
Yeah. Alex?
I was going to say that's quite nice. Is it on?
Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting because I do that internally as well. So the point of the learning metrics, I'm not even interested in that. I know it sounds mad, but that's like 5% of the impact that you can kind of show from an ROI point of view. And I spent my first 2 years working actually with our people analytics team, our data engineers, hoovering up data across the business, whether it's listening data, talent data, performance data, all our platforms, all of the engagement side of things. Even like Slack data, Google data, to then actually tell that longer story. So yes, you've requested something, you've purchased something, which is, we obviously want to empower that, and Ocado does have a culture of learning, to be fair. They're very keen, but a lot of organizations won't be like that. They won't come and ask for things. And that's allowed us to tell a really interesting story, which has then created that sort of that value proposition to our leaders, which I get challenged on from the CEO of the whole company, to go, right, we're spending all this money on this product, it's a completely different gig. What's going on with this? Why are we paying money? It's almost like paying money for a platform without any learning felt really weird. But actually, longer term play, when you see it now with our org goals and from a strategy perspective, interweaving that, because we've gone all go around like a bridging the gap, women in tech is a big piece for us. And then we bringing that through with the learning content and the platform, and then how that's impacted from our growth drivers and how they're feeling as women managers in the organisation, and actually telling that story, present that to our leadership team. They're like, this is insane. How have you done this? Because we've approached it in a different way.
And this is just a good example, right? Because I know this is all about, like, this is partly about sales, and everybody in the portfolio are getting better at sales. And sales is really difficult because you have to make some really tough decisions every day about who you spend your time on. Not to kind of be too complimentary, but like Alex is a great example of somebody who you should spend time working with and not qualify out, right? Because you have qualification decisions to make every single day, especially as a founder salesperson, especially if your background's technology or learning and it's not sales. Like, the decision you make to spend time on a prospect is your value time, and that kind of conversation is one worth investing in, versus others where it's clearly just an operational headache that nobody else is really going to care about, and you need to generate those kind of conversations to move up and sell.
Yeah, Greg, I think Alex thinks in quite a progressive way about this.
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know any other clients that think as carefully about the data as Alex does?
Are we still mid the sales conversation here?
That's quite interesting.
From an L&D perspective, not that much, if I'm honest, which is why I guess our buyer is the CDO or the CIO, because we want to have those conversations, but they are atypical in learning, not typical. So, yeah.
I mean, on that, my previous role, I was a CIO in an tech company, so I moved into a people space, and I was like, why are people not thinking in this way? This makes no sense to me. So it's almost like I'm a disruptor in the people team at Ocado, and challenging and thinking with a tech lens. And we're like 80% tech business, right? So if you're not talking in that way, people are not going to engage with you either. So it's really kind of flipping it. So I think it's an interesting one, because I don't think you are going to get that in the traditional L&D roles, but so your approach is bang on. On how to engage.
I'm going to come and ask some questions to the audience in a minute, so have a think about what you want to ask, but I've got one more first. Thinking about sort of planning forward, and think particularly about planning for skills that people are going to need in the future. This is a really difficult landscape to navigate. It's really rapidly changing. How are you thinking about what decisions you make now in order to anticipate what sort of skills change you might need to have in the future? And where is that conversation happening, to your point around, is that a learning conversation, or is it actually much more of a strategy conversation?
It's happening in the people team, for sure, and I'm very engaged in that conversation widely. I think there's various layers to that. There's the strategic goals of our business and where we want to get to. I think there's discussion around internal mobility, the diversity of our population as well, because I think there's a generational piece here. Like, Ocado is an interesting one because it's almost like a almost 25-year startup. That's what it feels like. But you've got a lot of people that have been there for a long time, and actually the new crop of talents coming through think differently, consume things in a different way. Obviously, there's an obvious thing around data and AI, which is a big topic, which Ocado's into as well. So I think it's just so many multivariables around the skills piece, and we're going through a big exercise around critical roles and what that looks like. I was actually in LinkedIn's offices today talking about talent insights and actually looking at market data and understanding, okay, well, what are competitors doing as well? I think that's really important to kind of analyse, because I feel like you can get really siloed in thinking we know everything, we're tech experts, but actually look outside, validate, test. So that doesn't really answers it, but there's a lot going on from a skills perspective for sure. But I think there's so many variables and metrics that you need to kind of combine together to get that. Because I think everyone thinks it's just very easy. It's a skill when I learn something, but actually that's not really where we're at.
But that internal, external, and comparing yourself with what others are doing, and seeing, kind of who's moving at what speed. Helen, I don't know if you've got a perspective on this and sort of what the sort of skills development landscape is looking like from your view.
I mean, it's massively changing. There are areas where we're going to need to see skills building, for example, in the green skill space, technology, AI. But there are some skills that will always be needed, like, soft skills continue to be in short supply, or, valued by companies, and something that needs to be developed. I think from what I see, companies sometimes struggle with the visibility, that, really understanding what skills they will need at what point in time, and therefore when they should start investing and really place budget behind those skills needs, because there's a lack of visibility about some at the moment. So a lack of visibility for companies is making it a bit tricky.
Yeah, no, just being able to see what's out there. Obviously your focus is on data skills. It sort of does what it says on the tin. Yep. What are the kind of complementary skills that you need alongside that? How do you think about the combination of skills that people need to kind of implement these things? You're talking about the kind of longer term effectiveness of it. That needs a lot of other things as well.
Yeah, I think our lens on data literacy actually isn't as skills focused as people would perceive it to be, I think. So we do very little hard skills. In fact, if what you want is Power BI training or Tableau training, we can give you like a tiny bit of that, but go do it with someone else. They're probably better at it than we are. I think for us, it really is about the mindsets and the behaviours around adoption and around engaging with difficult subjects, critical thinking, that type of thing that actually moves the needle in data literacy. The core problem with data and AI and cyber as a parallel example is that most people look at their day job as a business problem, not as a business problem that can be supported by one of those things. So actually, whether they've got the skills or not, if they're not thinking about it in that way, then they're not going to be they're not going to be useful to you as a business. I actually think that there are still some hard problems which have not been solved in EdTech. I think if anybody could materially impact frontline workers, not just serve them content that they don't particularly want on a device that they wish they didn't hold, fair play, has to be done. But I think that is a massive problem. If you've got warehouse staff, manufacturing staff, those are probably the problems that are still left unsolved at this point in EdTech. But they're a really, really hard problem. That's the truth of it. So that is where I would still be trying to solve the problem if it was not a subject that we're already forward looking.
All right. Do we have a microphone for the audience? I don't know. If not, we'll just have to stand up and shout. Do we have any questions from the audience for the panel? Matt here. Right, Matt, I'm going to ask you to use your voice and project in that case.
Thanks very much for the interesting conversation. One for you, Greg, if you're happy. I'd love to know more about the PMO and change management kind of concept you described. So it sounds like you can invest quite a lot into that kind of customer success and setup. So if you can maybe unpack that a bit more and say how you avoid over-investing or spending too much, basically. And the other, just maybe a side on the repeatable versus recurrent. I suppose, why necessarily draw a distinction as opposed to saying, well, we will recur unless you don't want us to recur?
Correct.
Yeah.
So, right, the concept of recurring revenue is an investor fallacy. Yeah. Because if your software's crap, they'll just cancel the 12-month contract anyway, right? So it's as repeatable as our repeatable revenue is. So we pitched. That's my question answered. That's that one. We pitched. People said this isn't recurring, and I said, all right, it's repeatable, and they went, that makes more sense. Cool. So I fully agree. It's a bugbear of mine. The first question, just because I'm sure it was quite quiet over there, was we talk about change management as well as EdTech. How do we do that? How do we keep it managed? We do put a large investment, and our revenue model is 70% from high gross margin education and technology and 30% from professional services, where we still make an okay gross margin, but it's nothing compared to the other services. However, I would say it's the differentiating factor in the work we do. So a line I will use very regularly: you can only teach people certain things so many ways, right? If you get into conversations where the conversation is about your curriculum versus someone else's curriculum and you're 4 times more expensive than them, they should pick the other curriculum. So what we do is we've got a set of productized services that is everything from meetings one-to-one with the executive leadership team, through to learner focus groups, through to fully built out comms plans, internal comms plans. We do media days, all in a productized fashion, all for a set price each time, which makes it palatable for the client and also drives us internally to become more efficient. Because if you look at that on day one and you think that's incredibly valuable, but you're making 20% margin on it, the only way to make it better is you can charge more for it, of course you can, but you don't want it to detract from the buying of the main product. So if you want to turn 20% into 40% or 40% into 60%, get better at doing it. And it's a full stack of services, but we do charge for it. Like we're not eating the cost. We make some level of margin, and we make better margin the better we get. So,
Helen, I just want to get your input on this as well, because obviously I'm not going to get too much into recurring versus repeatable revenue and how we classify that, but particularly that question of how much is this a productized service versus how much is this a repeatable product with a high margin is a key investor question. How do you think about that trade-off and what that means in terms of kind of ownership of the space?
Really good question. I think, obviously we prefer recurring revenue, particularly when a client is under a 2 or 3 year contract. That's what we love to see. However, if we can get comfortable that a business's reputation and relationship with that customer is really strong, then we can get comfortable that it is a contract that is going to repeat regularly. So it all comes down really to relationships and how good the product is.
Yeah,
I think that's that partnership layer. Everyone I work with is more a partnership than it is a client-supplier relationship. Mm-hmm. I don't engage at all. It's more working with us, adapting to us, allowing us to inform the product as well. I think that's really important to me, because obviously coming from the other side of it, doing that makes a better product for everyone. Yeah. So I think it's really important that you can build those relationships. Therefore, having those 2-3 year conversations kind of stifle creativity and innovation sometimes, but I know it's a necessary evil. But if you've got that trust, and I have that with other partners we work with, you build amazing things. Yeah. And you're going to keep going back to them because there's a trust there.
Yeah. And I think the crucial element there is, as you say, you're charging for those engagements, because there is a risk that you end up having lots of very long conversations with people who never buy at the end of the day. So building that where it's a genuine partnership is important. When it's actually a lot of free advice, that can be a bit of a dead end. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, Julian Bushmas, CEO of Impact. Thank you so much for the panel so far. My question is to Craig and Alexandros. For Craig, you talked about that you do value hunting as part of the process, and you talked about change management. Where do you get your insights that there is a change management piece in the first place? If you want to share around those.
No,
is it in the news or is it then too late? And then basically how many meetings do you need on average that you spend, let's say, 5 to 7 sales meetings on this value hunting piece?
Yeah, good question. So we realised there was one very early, because so our first 2 customers were scale-ups, and it was challenging on the whole. It was a very fast learning curve for us, and it was challenging. But what they had, which was nice, was a load of learners with appetite. Everyone kind of wanted to learn more about data, more about AI. But our 3rd client was Bentley, our 4th client was SSE, and our 5th client was Aston. And that very much pivoted the business almost on a dime. But the main difference between the 2 types of organisation wasn't, apart from the amount of money they were able to spend, was the fact that the learners all of a sudden didn't have the appetite. Their big problem stopped being elevation and more engagement. So if you take learning to people who don't want to learn or don't see the value in it, we all know, right, it ain't going to work that well. So we had to solve the problem of how do we get the learners to care first, and care is the right word, and then they'd learn, and then we'd be a successful learning partner. So from our side, what we did actually was we brought in a lady who I met through the industry. She is brilliant. She now works for the FCA again. She didn't at the time, but she works for the FCA again. And she kind of talked us through what she'd done, and the reason she'd made it work at Enterprise was because she'd spent a lot of time on change and winning hearts and minds first before she deployed education. And what we were able to do was kind of build a productized model around the model that she'd done once, and had a massive impact on the success of the programs and the projects. And that's why it's such so we don't do any learning programs that don't have a change piece. If, like, we've said no to some of the biggest companies in the world because all they wanted to do was learning, and we just know that doesn't deliver value for us. So the change is as much as important to the business.
The identification, use that to, I don't know, just like reach or into your
find me an enterprise that doesn't need it changing. So that's it though. Like every business, every large business over 1,000 people. I mean, you get this Ocado I describe as being in this like interesting middle bracket of startups and scale-ups that's kind of 10 to 25 years old. We work with ASOS, they're in that bracket, where even now, Ocado, AO.com, ASOS, they've got to a point where even they need transformation now. It's like, so if you're working at enterprise, everybody is transforming constantly. The only constant is change. Is like the phrase we always get back. People are change tired. So you can assume that every enterprise requires that level of engagement.
What, any other questions? Okay. Lady at the back.
Yes, Debbie Cole from Dynamic Knowledge. I think this question follows on quite well. In some sectors, there's very complex supply chains, yes, where 80% of the work gets pushed down the line to everybody else. What's your experience in getting buy-in in those kind of organisations? I'll give an example, like construction is very much like that. And the challenge of that, yes, and how does that change the value proposition or timeline or cost profile?
Yeah, so the question was about complex supply chains and sectors like construction, where there's the work happening all along the supply chain. I don't know if you've got any examples like that, Greg.
With data, the big thing
Yeah.
you see is the risk profiles changing. There's better data and shared data.
Yeah.
Construction has been interesting to us recently, actually. We're spending a decent amount of time there. Obviously, painful margins compared to the rest of the world. Like, in their world, like they'll still pay us the same, but when you're talking about 2% overall margin or 4% overall margin, the conversation does change. It's different from working with a business that's got 50% margins. And I think that's probably the place that the more detailed work around building the business case, building the ROI case, giving them a clear picture of how you can impact margin. Most of them will have a savings program of some sort, whether it's 10 million quid or 110 million quid over the next X years. Construction is a really good example of an area where it, as a vertical, has driven us to focus more on the ROI more clearly because they are so margin poor, and the response has just been to spend more and more time on the business case and the ROI case, and that has proven fairly successful so far. So,
Helen, can I come to you thinking about different sectors and ways in which learning might be distributed across a workforce in different ways?
One example that springs to mind is the NHS and the sort of challenges of selling into NHS trusts. That it surprises me, but there's very little sort of collaboration, I think, between NHS trusts. So selling to one doesn't mean that you are going to progress and scale terribly quickly. And I think the key here is just being prepared for a long sales cycle, digging in, and continuing to talk to as many operators in the sector as you can, but also diversify into other sectors, because you're going to need revenue from other sectors that may, where the sale is going to be quicker. And that revenue will enable you to stay in the sector that's going to be more challenging, but perhaps is a better sort of fit for your product and will deliver better scale and better margins down the line. And that difficulty in selling is in fact a competitive advantage. If you're the organisation that sticks at it, you're going to be able to gain more of the market share and benefit from it, whereas others may not stick around.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, our best relationships, our best partnerships are 2-3 years in the making. Like even some of the stuff that we've piloted and tested and validated, it's taken 2 years to get it over the line, but then the impact is, I don't mind having that long conversation. I'm assuming this from the sales side, it's a churn, but with some organisations it's going to take that time, but it's worth the effort because the output is great.
Yeah, as Helen said, you need a mixture of the short term and the long term to get you through those longer sales cycles.
But even the proof of values are quite good. I find they work quite well because you're kind of getting, there's some spends there. There's a commitment to spend. You're putting the branch out to say, right, we're engaged. We want to do this, but let's work together, and that informs the change piece as well, because then you're starting the wheels in motion of that, which has allowed us to do that from a commerce point of view as well. It's started to get all those stakeholders we're talking about engaged in that pilot or that proof of value, which really helps as well.
Yeah,
proof of value rather than proof of concept, also a really important framing. Like, proof of value forces you to have value points to actually measure against. Proof of concept wastes a lot of time.
Yeah, agreed.
I think there was a question down here.
Can I borrow that?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Stuart. I'm one of the UFI venture partners. It was kind of allied to that, and you've half answered it, but I want to try and get it from a different lens around how lots of early stage businesses here, how can you get to sale quicker, and how can you get there more efficiently?
Know your process. Have it clearly documented. We have a slide in our sales deck which is called the Data Literacy Academy buying process. We will literally tell you as an enterprise buyer the steps you've got to take, the people you need to bring in, the meetings you've got to have, what we expect from you in those meetings, and we're not shy about the fact that it's a buying process, because otherwise we're just all wasting our time here, right? So, like, for us, it's been, especially at enterprise, if you don't control the whole flow from literally first conversation through to delivery, you will never get a deal done. Like, because the mindset of enterprise is to push to the next financial year, So, and I will say this repeatedly to anybody who listens, the greatest sales technique I ever learned is a concept called BAM-FAM, which is book a meeting from a meeting. And nobody in our business, internally or externally, leaves a meeting with a prospect or with an internal candidate without having something fixed in the diary for the next step. And that is the momentum driver as a pure technique, beyond just having a defined process. BAM-FAM is the greatest sales technique you'll ever learn.
All right. Alex, any experience, advice either from your current position, perhaps from your former position as trying to sell in, and what's the way to get in those early sales?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously when you're getting sold to, when you know it, it's interesting. You're picking holes in something very quickly, aren't you? Like, 'cause I have a clear opinion of what I think good looks like, but I think it's two sides. So if you were selling to me, I'd be very much, what insights am I going to get from this? What data am I going to get from this? How am I going to integrate with my technology stack? Because half of the problem is always that IT layer. If you can cut through that, you're in the door. I think you can go down this journey for 6 months, 12 months, and then you come to like the InfoSec assessment, or you're talking to IT about how we can bring this in, and then the conversation stops. So you've wasted all that time. So it's kind of like validating that first, I think, is really important. And me being on the internal side now and looking at that and me going through that process myself, it's almost like challenge that prospect very quickly. Like, validate obviously if they are the one that's got the buy-in decision, but also challenge around, have you engaged with X, Y, and Z? So whether it's have you spoken to Group IT? Have you spoken to the InfoSec side? Have you engaged with other people that are going to be involved in this process? How does this fit into the wider ecosystem of that organisation? Because if you don't do that, it won't move. And then from my side, obviously I like shiny things. So what is that user experience? Is UX, because you can have the best features, you can have the best technology, but if that experience isn't right, I'm already disengaged within the first 15 minutes. I look at it, I can see it and go, no, thank you. So, but that's probably with my lens of obviously building those things myself.
I'm going to get you to step back one step as well. Greg, I know you have thoughts about how
you want to talk about BAMFAM again?
No. Before that, way before that, when we get to just who am I supposed to approach from the outside in, I've just got a list of organisations. Where do I start figuring out who is the right person at that organisation to find? Who do I speak to? How do I figure out what their priorities are even before we get into the meeting and I give them our sales process that they have to follow?
Yeah. So the way that I've always done this, and previously to Data Literacy Academy, I built go-to-markets for the startups, is a fairly lengthy, by all accounts, market research process. You can probably even still use LinkedIn automation for this, but the concept of kind of ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice, I think lives strong here. So firstly, you will get advice if you've got a structured market research process, test different personas, test different business personas. But very often, they also do convert to money because people will be like, oh, this is interesting now that we've had a conversation about it. But yeah, for us, it's always been about we'll automate a load of market research interview requests to different. Have a hypothesis, obviously starts with having a hypothesis. Have a hypothesis, is it CIOs, CDOs, chief people officers? Send automated messages to all of them, just saying, we're looking, help is a really important word. So the human brain reacts really kindly to the word help, so ask for help. Ask for help, say we've got something we think is exciting, but we want to test it first, we want to understand your world first. Get a half-hour conversation set up, ask a really good script of questions which cover off largely what you need to understand your ideal customer profile, but also probably uncover some of their pain. Finish those meetings with a kind of, if you want to know more about the research we can give it you or whatever, that'll be a bit of a call to action, but do keep it genuine, keep it market research focused. But the way to work out an ideal customer profile is to research the market, and the way to research a market is to do market research. So yeah, I'd say that every time.
All right. Any final top tips for selling in and for kind of getting these things over the line, Helen?
Just one thing springs to mind, and that is make it simple. Make the message that you want your prospective client to go away with at the end of each meeting to be something that they can talk to their CEO about in a lift and get the message across. And also just, taking their perspective, so putting yourself in their shoes and delivering it as something that will help them rather than your great product that will do this, this and this, looking at what exactly it will do for them and how it will solve a major pain point.
Alex, what's your top tip?
I think it's the storytelling side. So if you're empowering that buyer, to your point, I think it's telling the story in a very concise way. I think so many people don't do that, and it's everyone's obsessed with their own tools, services, everything that can provide, but actually, to your point, cut through it all. Very simple, clear message, because that person will go to the CPO asking for money or go to the CEO asking for money, and if you can't explain it in 15 seconds, what's the point?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Humans like the word help, but they also like stories. So that's definitely. Thank you very much. This is really hope everybody's got something useful out of that panel. We're at time. There are going to be refreshments available outside, and then the next session, the In Conversation with UFI's Chief Executive, will start upstairs at 4:30. But I hope you will join me now in thanking the panel for the discussion.
Thank you.